Hey, this is Jason with 4W Knives. Today's project is a little bit out of my comfort zone as far as knife making, that is. Since I started my hobby of making knives and doing these videos, I have always tried to steer away from how-to videos. And the reason for that is there are a lot of really knowledgeable people out there already doing them that are good at what they do. So I felt like I didn't really have a place in that world. However, after doing this for a longer period of time, I found that there were some things that helped me become better. And specifically on what I believe is the hardest part of knife making is doing the bevels. Of course, the bevels are this portion of the knife. You have the primary bevel and then the secondary bevel, which would be where the edge is. This one does not have a secondary right now. But getting these bevels where they look good was not an easy task, and it's still not an easy task today. However, I came up with 3 primary tips that helped me, which I'm hoping might help another beginner somewhere, on making better grinds, specifically flat grinds on their knives. So stay tuned if that sounds interesting to you, and I will give you my 3 tips. All right, so tip number 1 is going to be prepared, or prepare the blade for the grind. This is an old blade. I didn't actually do the grinding on this one. Somebody came out to the shop and was working on it through my guidance, but it was before I really knew enough myself. But I'm going to show here, see if you can see the center of the blade is not centered, or the edge of the blade is not centered, I should say. And it just looks wonky when you look at it. From the outside, it doesn't look bad, but when you start to look at it a little more closely, you can see how uneven it is. Now, this blade I do believe can be saved. I'm just waiting for him to have the opportunity to come back to work on it. But having this edge centered is a main part, or an important part of the knife blade making. So this tip is probably not anything new. If you've watched any videos, you've seen other knife makers do this. But the first step in being prepared is to get you a center line on your blade. Now, the method that I do is I bought this from Gents, and it's just a little center scribe, and you run it on both sides. Once you get that, hopefully you can see that, it gives you a guide that you will grind down to. That way you keep it centered, unless of course you mess up and go too far or something. It gives you a guide, and the guide is a very, very important part of that. Early on in my knife making, I did not do that. There are other methods. If you do not have the scribe, you can take a drill bit of the same thickness, set it flat, and drag it across, and that too will put a center line. You'll want to do both sides. So that is tip. Okay, the next part of tip number 1 on being prepared is to draw in your bevels. And there's a couple of ways, probably more than 2, that you could do this. You could color in the whole blade and then take this and scratch it in. What I do instead is I find whatever height that I want, and I'll just put a couple of marks, and I'll go all the way however far down I need to go, and then I'll connect those dots. I'll show that in just a second. All right, so here is what I'm talking about. I have shown where I want my plunge line to be on both sides, and it matches up to the height of how high up I want to bring the bevel, and it matches on both sides. Now, I like to set my line actually a little bit lower than what I'm actually going to end up with. So I'll do my rougher grit, the 36 grit, up to this line, and then with the 80 and the 120, I will bring it up just a little bit. So tip 1, be prepared. Being prepared means I have a center line drawn and my bevel lines drawn. That would be tip 1. So primary tip number 2 is going to be make sure you have the blade stabilized. And what I mean by that, the way I do it, is keep my elbows tucked in front of me, and I try to use my whole body moving at once. By doing this, I avoid any of the wobble or the agitation that can be caused by not having it stable. I do not want to press it hard. I want to keep a gentle pressure to it, but I want that pressure to be stable. Another way you can do this is with a tool rest or a work rest. It sits out in front. As long as that is square to the flat platen, you can rest it on it and just drag, and the bottom of the rest keeps it stabilized. Dennis Terrell with Terrell Knife Works, his YouTube channel, that's how he does it. I've messed with it a little bit. I haven't had great success as of yet. I still plan on doing it, but I haven't practiced enough. So there's push stick method. There's lots of methods. My way is I keep my elbows in and I go. I used to do it sitting down, and I still do that with my hollow grinds just because of where the wheel sits. But so it can be done without elbows in. That's just probably the most consistent way that I have found to do it. Okay, so now that we're talking stability, let me just explain a couple of little things. It is important that the blade stays squared to the platen the entire time. It's difficult to do this for myself because the tip will want to sway out a little bit away from it. Sometimes I push it in too much. Sometimes I can't quite get the angle the same. Those things are important with maintaining the consistency on our guides that we just put in. So to keep it stable is very important. And so when you're setting, my left hand always tends to pull away for whatever reason. So I really have to focus on keeping my left hand as the puller and my right hand as the press. And when I'm talking press, I'm talking pressure. Because obviously if I want to remove more from the edge, I apply more pressure towards the edge. If I want to apply more towards the spine of the knife, I will put more pressure towards the spine, because you're creating an angle going up. That creates the bevel. So, all right, so just a little additional tip. If you can see how the belt is not quite centered here, this will affect how your plunge line looks. If it hangs off like it is on this side, that will create somewhat of a curve. If it's right on the edge, it'll create more of a sharp line. So be aware when you're doing this, that make sure that your belt is consistent on both sides if you want the bevels to be consistent on both sides. Something that took me a while to figure it out. All right, and the last of the primary tips is going to be a simple one that you hear from everybody. I heard from everybody, and the problem with it is, in order to do this, it costs money. It costs belts, it costs steel, it costs everything. It costs your time, and that is practice, because there is a little bit of a feel to it. When I first started, I almost abandoned free hand grinding, but I wanted to do more complex grinds later. I knew from the other videos I had to do that, but practice is important. And I'm going to go ahead and give you 2 ways that you can practice, probably more than that. The first is if you want to practice while working on a blade itself. One method that I did that helped me gain control is I did a bunch of just full flat grinds. So full flat grind comes from the edge all the way to the spine. I did a lot of those because it didn't require a lot of control. But what I started to do was practice and try to control my bevel on both sides as I was working back towards the spine. In essence, I just would go on this line. If I messed it up, I would raise it a notch, and I would try to make this one match. I practiced while I was doing full flat grinds on trying to do control grinds. I'm not sure what those are called, but that was one method that really helped me. It just made me more aware of where my pressure was. And as we start here on the actual grinding, you'll see that I will start here and I will get around a 45, but it's not true 45. I will get that and I will try to get that straight, and then I will just slowly inch that up. Well, as I work on this side, I will go to this side. Nowadays, I try to do the entire side of the bevel before I move to the other side, but while I was practicing, I would do a little bit and come over here and try to make that match. The other method of practicing is out of wood. I did this to start with. I had a bunch of these that are roughly the same thickness as a knife, maybe not quite, but close. I need blanks anyways, so I would make some blanks out of wood. They're easier on the belt. They're easier on the funds because you can get this a lot cheaper than you can steel. And you can practice your angle control. Of course, it's going to be wood instead of steel, so it comes off a lot quicker, makes you have a lot more control of it. It's much more sensitive, but it was one method. I hear people buying mild steel and doing the same thing, and that would probably be a more realistic feel. But again, whenever I started this, I was trying not to spend money. Because it was a hobby. It was something that I wanted to start. Now that I sell a few and I can reimburse my bank account once I sell a few for my hobby, I'm able to spend a little bit more. But prior to that, honestly, I was trying to get out of it without spending any money. And like a lot of people, because you don't know if you want to do it for full time or not. So my tip 3 is practice. And have a purpose during your practice. Try and control, trying to stabilize, doing the different things that the better knife makers are doing was my goal. I've coached softball in a high school setting for many years now, and it's one thing to say we practice, and it's another thing to say we practiced with a purpose. And that is all I'm saying is come out with a intention, come out with a plan. My plan that helped me the most was controlling the height of that bevel on both sides, trying to get them to match. It might be the day that you're practicing, you want to try to work on a controlled edge here or plunge line. If you can control your plunge line and make them match on both sides, then you've gained something. I saw a video by I think it's Alley Knives or something like that on YouTube, and he did 6 or 7 blades in a row. And again, if you have that time and you've made those, that's a good way to practice. But above all else, practice. Put your time in and it will get there. I do not use a jig. I have nothing against jigs. I think they're great. I just, again, wanted to be able to do more complex grinds. This is not what I would consider a complex grind. It's probably one of the easier ones. I still mess it up even after 3 years. Okay, so as I start this demonstration part, I feel like I should mention that going at a slower speed helps. And the way it helps is that it removes less steel, obviously, which means that you can make a mistake without it being catastrophic. And you can go back in and fix those mistakes. Now, I understand that's not something everybody's going to have. When I first started, the homemade belt grinder that I had 1 speed and it was blazing fast. So every time that I got a little bit top heavy or toe heavy or whatever, it created big mess ups. And big mess ups were harder to fix. Now that I'm lucky enough to have this AmeriBraid, I can go at a slightly lower speed, remove steel. If I make a mistake, it's not that bad, and I can go back in and fix it. And fixing mistakes is part of knife making, as you'll find as you progress further. Even as I was doing this demonstration, I wasn't keeping it as balanced as what I'd like. Partly because my focus was on the camera and not so much on what I was doing. so my focus wasn't great. And some days it's not. Some days I can be working on a knife, stop, and go back in the house because I'm just not able to get it to look the way it's supposed to look. At this point in the grind, you can see it's not bad, but as I raise it up into the view, you can see it's not very even. I just got, my pressure wasn't balanced or even throughout the drag with my left hand, and you can see right by my thumb I removed a little bit more. So as I go back to the grinder, I will focus on cleaning that up. Even after I clean it up at this point, it's still not going to be perfect. It won't get close to the perfect range, and none of it's perfect, but I'll say closer to it, or closer to acceptable range. It won't get to that until I'd use the higher grit belts, like the 80 and the 120. I really don't do my finish grinding and get my finished look until after I do my Trizac belts and the hand sanding part. So it's not going to be perfect prior to the heat treat. And I cannot stress enough, the purpose of this video was not to show how great I am at grinding or anything like that. The idea was to show you some methods that help me improve. I still have a lot of room to improve, as you guys who watch my videos know. Sometimes it's not the ones that are best at doing something that are the best at explaining it. Sometimes it's those that struggle and share the same struggles as you and how they overcome those struggles that help us improve. So I'm hoping that the video serves as this purpose. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm kind of showing my final grind on that. If you have some tips that helped you become a better knife maker, put them in the comments. Maybe somebody can read it and it'll help them. Heck, maybe I'll read it and it'll help me. All these little tips, all these little tricks have helped me grow as a knife maker, and it's because of the videos, because of the people that put it out there. So I just hope I accomplished that goal. I hope you enjoyed the video somewhat, and I appreciate it. And until the next one, have a good one.